So I'm now going to go over how to create a project that uses Runtime Compiled C++ with Visual Studio and using the Dear ImGui DirectX11 Win32 example. So we're going to need Runtime Compiled C++, and in this case I'm going to download a zip and save that out and do the same for ImGui. And once again, if you wanted to make sure you have exactly the versions that I used from this tutorial, you can go to the Runtime Compiled DX11 example page and click on the links in the folders there. So hopefully those are now downloaded into my download documents, and then extract them to this folder and do the same with ImGui. And then in a few seconds, hopefully that will be done. What I'm going to do now is, this is the actual folder that we want, this Runtime Compiled C++. So I drag that out, move it over into this from scratch folder. We're going to need to move it again afterwards, but for now this will do. And again, rename that just to ImGui. Okay, so we've got this ImGui folder and we've got the Runtime Compiled C++ folder. And then normally what I would do within these is, at this point, is I would just go into them and check out whether the examples work using the example from there, and then make sure they do work before progressing any further. But I happen to know, having done this a few times with this example, that these two things do work. So we'll progress to the next part of the tutorial. So these steps have you making a repo first. In this case, since we're not actually going to create a Git repository, we're just downloading these as folders. And then there's the test code, which we're not doing. But we're going to do this third step, which is to create an empty Visual Studio console project. And we're creating a console project because it's one of the easiest projects to create. And it creates the basic code that we need. And then we're going to remove almost everything except for the solution. So we're going to put this into RCCPP. Let's make sure we actually use the right name here. So I'm going to call this by the same name as this. And we're going to put it into, in this case, terrible to use the desktop. But there we go. I'm going to put that into this folder. And it's going to create a folder for us. I've got using the solution and project in the same directory, by the way. So I found that the most useful for this particular case. And then I'm going to close that. We're not going to need much of this code at this point. So then I'm going to move the two folders, the ImGui folder and the Runtime Compiled C++ folder, into the folder that was created by Visual Studio. And so we've got those two folders there, and we've got this Visual Studio solution with the two project files and the user project file along with some code. And we're going to delete all of the created code except for this solution, because we're going to use the example from ImGui as the project file. So as per step 4, we're going to copy the example code from this location, example Win32 DirectX11 in this case. I'm not copying the entire folder. We don't need the entire folder, we just need the contents, sorry. So what we need is this main.cpp and the two project files. And we put that down into our root directory. We're then going to rename the project files to the same name as the project files that were created by the wizard, which we then removed. So these two are the same name. But because we've moved the project files, we're going to need to change the paths. So I'm going to do that by opening these project files up with Notepad++. And you'll note that these are XML files. And they're relatively easy to understand. What you can see here is they have these sections which say that they include this header and compile include these files. And you'll note that they're being referred to, in this case, by /imconfig, whereas we know that's actually going to be in the ImGui directory. So we're going to replace all instances of these two and replace those with, in this case, ImGui. And we're going to do that in all of the open documents, because here we have just these vcproject.filters and vcproject opened, and those are the correct ones to be doing this with. And then we're doing the same thing with dot dot. You have to do it in this order, otherwise it won't work. Dot dot is going to be replaced with ImGui/examples. If you did it in the other order, you'd be in problem. So here we have dot dot slash, and that's going to be replaced with ImGui/examples. So replace all, okay, and these are all reasonable paths. So we save those out, we close that, and then if we open up the solution, cross fingers, we should find that it loads these projects, and it tells us that because these projects were made with an earlier Visual Studio toolset, we can then upgrade them. So we're going to upgrade them to version 10 in our case. And then we can take a look at the code. We have this main.cpp file that we can open, and we can compile this. Run it. And there we go. It's opened up the Dear ImGui DirectX11 example. And so I'm going to close this file because we're going to continue with doing some tricks. So we're going to take now the Runtime Compiled C++ code that we need. Project files, sorry. We're not going to move the code, just the project files. So the Runtime Compiled C++ consists of the runtime compiler and the runtime object system. The rest of the code here is part of the examples. So if we take the runtime compiler, it has the project file is in there. And in this case, we're going to copy it across and place it again down in our example, and then go back in to the runtime object system, and again we find that there are these two vcproj and vcproj filters, and then go all the way down to our root directory and place those in there. And again, for historical reasons, this runtime compiler project was called _vs2010. I'm going to just remove that so that it's a little cleaner to look at. And because we're not using VS2010 anymore. And then, following the instructions in the tutorial, you'll note that we need to do some path replacement. Only this time it's a little bit more complicated, but again, it's fairly simple stuff. So we're going to start with the runtime compiler. So we open those two files up. And then we're going to open our solution. Now, I'll remove that breakpoint. In the Solution Explorer, I'm going to add existing project. So we go there, and I can add the runtime compiler. And once again, add existing project. And I can add the runtime object system. So these two are currently using Visual Studio 2010 settings. So I'm going to show you how to change them in the actual property sheets. So I'm going to go to all configurations and all platforms, so that the change that we make will work for everything. And what we see in general is it's got here the Windows SDK version. That's set to 10. That's great. Latest installed version. And here I can choose which particular version I want to use. And V142 is the one for the Visual Studio I'm using at the moment, which is 2019. So now that the project's set up, we should be able to compile. And it looks like this is working. Right, and I'm going to put Visual Studio on the left-hand side so I can follow along on the right-hand side. And we've just updated Visual Studio versioning for the project configuration. So now what we're going to do is the rest of it. So basically, we need to add include directories for both Runtime Compiled C++ and for Dear ImGui. So go into properties for just the solution, sorry, just the project Runtime Compiled C++ DirectX11 example, which is the one that has the code that we're writing in it. And then if we go into the C++ general, we'll see additional include directories. And here we're going to change these to add all of the directories that are here. This is ImGui, ImGui Examples, also Runtime Compiled C++, Aurora Runtime Object System, and Runtime Compiled C++ Aurora Runtime Compiler, where Aurora is a historical name coming from the demo that we were making for this, and we've just kept it the same. So I'm going to copy that lot and just overwrite what we had there. Okay, so that looks good. Again, we can apply that, and I'm just checking, yes, it has applied it to all configurations and all platforms. To make sure that we compile the runtime object system and the runtime compiler before our own code, we're going to set up project dependencies. So this is this next step here. So to do that, we click on, I believe, the solution, and then there's a project dependencies here in the middle. And then we make sure that runtime compiler, runtime object system are ticked. I actually have already done this in a test, so this should work, but you'll probably find that this is unticked, and then you need to tick these on, and then you'll be able to ensure that the runtime object system, then the runtime compiler are built before the code that you have is built. And then what we're going to do next is ensure that the libraries are included and that the library directories are set correctly. So the thing is that the libraries will be placed in the output directory. So the first part of ensuring that we can use these libraries is that we're going to change the output directory. So we're going to do that for all of these. I noticed I've got a mistake in my documentation that I need to change there. So I'll do that later on. And we go to our general. Here we have the output directory, and this is currently on different options. The defaults that come with Visual Studio are not great. So we're going to set the output directory to be this. So again, here I'm changing all of the configurations, all of the platforms for all of the projects to have this structure where we have the solution directory, then the build, and in this case, an intermediates directory followed by the project name and then the platform. So I apply those settings and okay that. And then we're just going to take the one project, the Runtime Compiled DirectX11 project, and we're going to ensure that the additional library directories are set up. So we're going to need the libraries for Runtime Compiler and Runtime Object System. And so in the linker, we go into the general case, and we have down here additional linker directories. And in front of these different options, we're just going to add the out dir and then a semicolon as the delimiter. And then we can apply those. Again, I'm checking I'm on all configurations or platforms. And then we're going to add into the linker inputs. Here we see we've got direct3d and dxgilib. We're going to add this runtime compiler.lib. And we're going to add the runtime object system.lib. By default, these take on the name of the project. So we okay that. And let's check it builds without errors. Okay, so that seems to be building without errors, and in fact we can see that the directory here that the libraries are going to are into this x64 build x64 debug followed by the name of the library with as in the x64 and debug case. You might want to invert those if you're fond of seeing it in the same order as it is up here. So that's the basic project setup complete.